Welcome, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. I'm going to have you stand up because I know after lunch you're going to have that post-comatose food. Just take one big stretch and then go ahead and sit down. My name is Rebecca Grier. I am actually a behavioral scientist. I have been working for a little over 20 years in what is now called UX research. It's gone through many names over the time. But I am here to talk to you about how humans think and tell you why you need to understand how humans think so that you can make great products. We're going to start with just this image here. I selected it on purpose because before COVID, probably nobody in their right mind would have assumed any kind of working situation like this. A mother on her laptop with her cell phone and two kids going, "Mommy, mommy, 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 mommy." But this is a situation a lot of us find ourselves in post-COVID. Second scenario I'm going to talk to you about. Who can take a guess in terms of the number of returns of functioning products where the reason for return was it doesn't work? Shout them out.
60.
60? Higher or lower? 80?
80-20.
Any other guesses? Come on, it's just a guess. 2,000%. Okay, that's an interesting math.
Is there an alternative? No reason given?
Higher than it really is.
Well, these are only functioning products, so this isn't just the number of products that have been returned, but these products worked, but the person who returned it said it doesn't work. What percentage?
Worse, but he wants to say it doesn't work because it's easier.
Well, that's not, I didn't ask the reason, I asked what percentage. 68% of functioning products that were returned, so they tested them, said, yep, it works. The person who returned it said it doesn't work. Now, yes, some of these might be because of the fact that somebody was like, I don't want to buy this. But a lot of them are the person couldn't make it work. And so they returned it because they couldn't get it to work. So therefore, it didn't work. My last story before I get into the psychology, the behavioral science, is a sad one from 3rd of July, 1988. The Iran Air Flight 655 took off from Tehran carrying 290 civilians with crew and passengers, and it was shot down by the USS Vincennes. This tragedy teaches us a lot about how humans think. Why did this tragedy occur? Well, at that time in the Persian Gulf, there had actually been many skirmishes between Iran and the United States. There had been several small engagements beforehand. So the crew of the USS Vincennes were on high alert for any other sort of attack. In addition to that, the display that was shown that there was a plane approaching the ship very, very quickly, and it had taken off from an airport that is one of the very few airports in the world where both commercial and military planes take off from the exact same runways, the exact same airport, everything. All they could tell, though, from their display was that it was approaching them fast. It was very difficult for them to learn if it was gaining in altitude, decreasing in altitude, or staying steady, all of which would have given them information into its intent. In addition to this, the USS Vincennes had one of the very first Aegis systems on board. The Aegis was remarkable at its time because every ship in the carrier group that was with it had the same track numbers on their displays to make communication easier between the ships. How this happened was that as a track was lit up, it was assigned a number on each ship independently, and then moments later, they changed the track numbers. Because the Persian Gulf is one of the busiest shipping and airline lines in the world, tracks were being recycled frequently. The track number on on Air Flight 655 had been a military jet not earlier in the day. In addition to this, the Vincennes, in the minutes that they had to make this decision, and I'm not talking 20 minutes, I'm talking 3-5 minutes tops to make this decision, they tried to hail the aircraft multiple times, but there were multiple communication systems that they could try and hail them on, and they weren't getting a response on any of them. So the captain made the decision to fire and then learned that it was a passenger jet and not a military aircraft striking, that they were actually on takeoff and they were speeding because they were trying to get to altitude. They didn't have this information though, and that is why they made this mistake. There were a lot of factors. A lot has been written about this topic, so you can read more if you'd like to. But these three stories all have one thing in common, and that is naturalistic decision making. Humans all think the same way. And the more we understand about how humans think, we can learn how they're going to use our products, and we can help them to use them appropriately. If we don't think about how they're understanding and how they're thinking about the products, how they're going to make decisions, then we are going to lead them to bad situations. So I said naturalistic decision making. You're probably going, what the hell is that? Well, for a long time, behavioral scientists, philosophers thought that humans actually did calculus in our brains, we just didn't know it, or that we had all of these complex ways. Turns out that that's not the case. Naturalistic decision making is the current, basically, understanding of how humans process information. It's sometimes referred to as the dual model. If you've read Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, you're going to get a synopsis of that today. So naturalistic decision-making really did come out of the Vincennes incident. The US Navy launched a research program called Tactical Decision-Making Under Stress through TADMIS. From that, an annual conference on naturalistic decision-making was launched, as was my career. I worked for the US Navy, not shortly, but in direct response to research that came out of the TADMIS program. So this cartoon is basically what is naturalistic decision-making, or how we understand how humans think today. We have a real world. It is sensed. We sense it through our various sensation systems. Fun fact, we actually have more than 5. I know you were all taught in primary school there's 5 sensation systems. There's way more than that. Ask me about it another time. Those sensations go through a filter that exists in our long-term memory. That filter can then choose to take action. They can choose to pass that information on, those sensations on, for more processing, or it can say, I don't want to deal with that information. When it goes into working memory, where it is processed, if it goes on to working memory, the first thing is that we make situation awareness, which is 3 levels: perception, comprehension, and projection. I sense that there is something there. I'm aware that it's there. I understand what it means, and I can predict how my actions or its actions are going to change in the future. Perception, comprehension, projection. Once we have situation awareness, or to the degree we think we can get it, then we start analyzing in terms of decision making. Should I do A or should I do B? And then we take action. That action changes the world, and the whole cycle changes all over again. The filter uses pattern recognition. This is built up through a process called sense making that also happens in working memory. Some of these patterns that we have in our filter are universal. Basically, the world has patterns. We learn these patterns as babies. If I have a small child, when he was an infant, he would be looking in the ceiling at lights or fans or corners, and my mother-in-law would say, he's looking at angels. And I, as a psychologist, knew, no, he was trying to understand, there's a different contour there. What is it? Why is it there? His brain was forming these universal patterns. The Gestalt principles, if you've talked to your designers, they talk about these a lot. Those are some of the universal patterns. We also all learn the same math, 3 + 3 = 6. These are universal patterns that exist in all of our brains. There are also cultural patterns. What's that? Yeah, the Berlin TV tower, yes. Before I came to Berlin, I wouldn't have known what that is, but now I do. And I will always recognize it and think of this fine conference. Anybody know what this is? Yes, good, I have some Irishmen with me, yay. How about this? Ooh, anybody else? It's American football goalposts, yep. It's Richard Ayoade, both from Travel Man and the IT Crowd. I picked this picture because when he stayed in Amsterdam in Travel Now, it was in this chain of hotels, and it took me a good half hour to figure out if he'd stayed in this hotel or not, but it was the one in Amsterdam. And then, anybody know what those are? Language, what languages? It is the word language in 3 languages. Which 3? Irish, yay. Primary school system is paying off, yay. Russian? Hindi, yes. Very good. If you haven't familiar with those languages, depending on even if you're familiar with those alphabets, that looks just like a bunch of squiggles. It was fun when my kid was learning how to write, that he was like, the letter with a 1 and a 3, and for B, had no idea. But as he became literate, those words became meaningful to him. And then patterns can be individual. Now, it's really, really, really hard to show individual, so I'm showing 3 or 4 very expert patterns. So these could be considered cultural, but they're very tiny cultures. If you have any background in air traffic control, you can probably tell me what airport that is. If you have chess, I could take those pieces away and you could play that again, or you know what move is being taught here. I've never played chess, so I don't know. If you have a background in medicine, you can tell me if that chem bio is good or bad. And then if you have an advanced degree in mathematics, physics, engineering, you can tell me that equation and why it's one of the most important equations ever, and everyone knows it. The point is although we all think the same way and that same underlying process is there, every single one of us have a different set of patterns in our filters. Just like Margaret Mead said, you are unique just like everyone else, and this is why we have communication problems. As has happened in this Dilbert cartoon, where can I put my most important files so I won't lose them, is the manager's point. He says, I'll balance them on top of the trash can so the janitor knows they're not part of the actual trash. The janitor comes along. These things must be what are most in need of discardation. So the exact opposite of what the manager thought should happen. Can I have a volunteer, please, to further show the importance of our pattern recognition? Preferably if you have C2 English or native English. Oh, it's not going to hurt. You're not going to embarrass yourself. All right, great. Just, you can stay right there. Yeah, yes. Yes. All right, ready?
Yep.
I'm going to put some symbols on the screen. They are in 3 columns and multiple rows. I need you to say what color ink each symbol is in as fast as possible. I don't care what order, but as fast as possible. Okay? You ready?
Yep. Green hash, blue hash, yellow hash, red, yellow, green, red, blue, yellow, red, green, red, blue, blue, yellow, red, green, yellow, green, blue, red, green, blue, yellow. I know where this is going.
Was that hard? Was that hard?
Not that hard.
Okay. I'm going to do the exact same thing, just different symbols. Say it as fast as you can, the color of ink. Okay?
All right. Green, blue, yellow, red, green, red, blue, yellow, red, green, red, blue, blue, yellow, red, green, yellow, green, blue, red, green, blue, yellow.
You actually did do that. I have to say, you have done that the fastest and with the least mistakes I've ever seen. So very good to you. But this is actually a phenomenon that we have known about in behavioral science. The Germans first discovered it in 1929. It happened in America in 1935. The American gets the name, the Stroop effect. If I knew you were going to be the person to volunteer and I knew anything about you, I could put your family's names up, your favorite hobby, names associated with the company you work for, and you'd have the exact same problem. Colors are just the most universal thing to cause the problem. It is because nobody asks us to say the color of ink quickly after we're 4 or 5 years old. After that, we're expected to read, and we have all learned to read in whatever language is most use the most often, to a level where we can't stop ourselves from reading. We will read, and when our brain will go, what do you mean you want me to say the color of the ink that it's printed in? Why would I do that? I've never been asked to do that in my life. And it causes a lot of effort to turn off the filter saying, nope, do this action, which is stage one of what the filter's supposed to do, is just say, hey, you have a stimulus, here's a pattern, you're supposed to do this thing. And it is almost impossible for us to turn that off if we have learned it to the level of what we call automaticity. Basically, we do it. The second thing the filter can do is it can use these patterns and pass these patterns on to our working memory. The more complex the patterns are, they can be dynamic even and have sequences of events and lots of information, the higher our situation awareness is. So experts are experts because they have complex patterns in their filters, and that is why they have situation awareness. The faster you have situation awareness, the faster you can make a decision. The more complex the patterns are, the more likely you are to not have to spend effort to go, what the hell is that thing? Why? Oh, it's going to do this. What is it going to do? I don't understand. And it just happens through this process of sense making that we build up those patterns. And when we have those patterns, we have situation awareness. I shouldn't say if we have complex patterns appropriate for the domain. And then that's what we can go forward with. And these patterns are really important because everything that happens in working memory requires what we term attention resources. Psychologists are really bad at naming stuff. So resources. The amount of resources needed to complete a task compared to the resources available is what we term cognitive workload, sometimes gets shortened to cognitive load. So the more energy I have to spend to get to situation awareness, the higher my cognitive workload, the more work I have to do. So experts in tasks have less workload because they already have the situation awareness from the patterns coming forward. Whereas as you're learning a new environment or you're in an uncertain situation, you're spending more resources coming up with that situation awareness and making trade-off decisions to make decisions, so you have higher cognitive workload. Okay, this is an activity I want all of you to do.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white passed the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes.
How many people got 16? Show of hands. Okay. I'm going to ask you all that got 16, put them up again because I didn't actually get a good look. I'm curious. Okay. I'm going to ask you to put your hands up again in a second.
Did you spot the gorilla?
At 16 hit passes, put your hands up again. How many of you spotted the gorilla? Okay, keep your hands up.
For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game?
Hands up if you saw all 4 things and got 16 passes. Ooh. Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting.
Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more.
Okay, so this is a phenomenon called selective attention. It's also known as change blindness. There's a version of it for websites called banner blindness. There's nose blindness. There's sound blindness, everything. Basically, because we have such limited resources available to us, our filter can say, hey, that information isn't relevant to your task, so I am not going to pass it on to working memory. And even though it's there in plain sight, you will not see it because your brain goes, I don't need to worry about that. If you'd heard about monkey business illusion, even the fact that it was called the monkey business illusion, I wish I could take that out, that kind of triggers, hey, I should be looking for a gorilla or a monkey or something like that. Gorillas aren't monkeys, but that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, but your brain needs to conserve the amount of resources, and that's what the filter's job is to pass on sensations in patterns so that it reduces the amount of resources needed to get situation awareness, and to not pass on information that's not relevant to your task at hand. This is why movies, if you have a favorite movie, after the third, fourth watching it, you might see flubs in it. If you're watching a movie with your significant other and it's not your cup of tea, you may be distracted by flubs in that movie and that your significant other didn't even notice because they're so into it. One of my favorites is I watched the movie Far and Away. You can tell by my accent I was raised in the States. It's supposed to take place during the United States land rush in the 1800s. Basically, half the United States weren't states yet, but when Tom Cruise, in his horrible Irish accent, gets off the ship, and there are flags waving with 50 stars, meaning that there were 50 states. They couldn't be bothered to find a flag from the 1820s with far fewer stars. This distracted me from the movie, but because the story and his accent were so bad, I was willing to be distracted by these kinds of things. If you really like a movie, you're not going to notice this until your fourth, fifth, sixth time watching it or rereading a book. This is why rereading books and rewatching classics are good, because you start to pick up on subtleties that you see that are either good or bad going forward. Okay. Switching gears a little bit, we've talked about resources required for the task. These interact with the stress we're experiencing to ensure how well we're going to perform a cognitive task. We all know that if we have too many resources required for a task to complete, we're in an overload situation, that's not going to go well. But we can also be in a situation where there are too few resources required for a task, and this can lead to poor performance. We can either have a situation of complacency, which the military, the ISS, all sorts of things, people in Antarctica have this experience that basically they get there to wherever they're going, and they're like all excited and nervous, and it's like, this is exciting, and everything's new and shiny, and our brain is paying attention to everything, and so we're taking up information. Then about 2/3 of the way through our tour of that, be it on the space station, a foreign country, our brain is like, yep, I know what's going on. I don't need to pay attention to this. Nothing's going to happen. That's complacency. And that is when all of the accidents happen. On a military mission, on the space station, in Antarctica, on a Navy cruise. If something's going to go wrong, it's going to be when 2/3. This is why it's often in the military, not in Antarctica because the seasons are so short, but space station, they never have a whole replacement going through. They try and replace in sweeps so that not everybody is at that zone of complacency at the same time. On the other spectrum, if you are in a high stress situation and you have to pay attention to something really, really boring, with very low demands of your attention, you are also going to fail. We discovered this in World War II, that plane bomber radar came about. Their job was to look and to see if there were submarines underneath. For 15 minutes, if a U-boat came through, the Brits would go, yep, that's a submarine, let's bomb it, and things go the way they're supposed to go. If after 15 minutes, the radar operator would miss it. And they would actually coming back from their flights complaining as being as tired and exhausted as the pilots were, because it was so hard for them to maintain their focus. After 15 minutes, they could no longer control their thoughts. Their minds were wandering and having to bring their thoughts back and go, no, I need to watch this. required so much energy of themselves, because we have not evolved to look at very specific things with no signals going forward. We are always paying attention to our entire environment. And that is actually called the vigilance decrement. If you've ever lifeguarded or you watch lifeguards switch positions every 15 minutes, it's because of this. The TSA, security at airports, they switch positions every 15 minutes because of this. Because it's only about 15 minutes that we can sit there and pay attention to a boring task. If we are in a high-stress situation, even if there are a lot of demands, though, we can experience what's called cognitive tunneling. Again, it was first discovered by the US military with fighter jets, that they would basically get into a dogfight or something similar, and all they could pay attention to was the planes that were immediately around them, and they'd get blown up by a plane that was further away because they were only focused on this threat immediately in front of them. Later research has shown that anything stressful causes the same problem. Researchers measured the IQ of farmers in India about a month before the harvest and a month after the harvest, and they found a 15-point drop in their IQs immediately before the harvest to after the harvest, because basically they had gone through all of their money for the year, they needed the harvest to come in, they were stressed as to if that harvest doesn't come in, I'm not going to be able to feed my family, and they couldn't think of anything else. And so for those months until their harvest came in, they were essentially deprived of cognitive resources because of the stress. Chronic poverty, chronic stress of any kind does this. I have a whole other talk about how to alleviate chronic stress in the workplace to prevent cognitive tunneling and have great decision making. I know. This is fascinating, but why would I care? Why would you care? I'm a programmer. I don't need to know about what people think or how people think at this level. Well, we often think that as technology increases, the need for a human decreases. And in fact, Sheridan and Verplank, again, US Navy scientists, in 1976 said this and documented it in a paper and said there are 10 levels of automation. And they basically said, hey, at level 1, a human does something, says, I want this done, tells a computer to do it, the computer does it. And then goes up the level there with human doing less and the automation doing more until the automation's just doing stuff. And it may or may not tell the human that it did anything. Not less than 10 years later, a woman named Lizanne Bainbridge from the UK wrote her seminal paper in the human factors literature called The Ironies of Automation. And she basically said, that's not what happens. Yes, at level 1, we have teleoperation. We have the human asking the computer to do something. The machine allows the human to do something the human wouldn't have been able to do beforehand. But, when we get to levels 8, 9, and 10, it used to be when I first started giving this presentation, level 7 didn't exist, but Teslas are out there, so. But basically, 8, 9, and 10 only exists in science fiction, and it's all badness. I'm just curious, how many other science fiction geeks, what 3 movies or TV shows are up there? Space Odyssey, Terminator 2, The Real Geek Test. Nope. What? Nope. The Orville, yes, yeah. All right, see, I got my geek cut. All right, but badness happens, basically. In all of our science fiction, badness happens. And Tesla, lots of bad accidents have happened because of the automation taking over and the human not being there. And actually, throughout time, we have found that as we increase the amount of automation, badness happens. Aviation, in the 70s, they started putting in autopilot, and they said, we're not going to need pilots anymore. The worst accidents happened in the 1970s. Chernobyl, among other things. As automation increased, the likelihood and the size of the disaster increased as well. There is a sweet spot in terms of how much automation and how much it actually improves the system and our performance with that system. So these are all accidents that happened because of automation or things that went wrong. Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, the 1977 New York City blackout. I said the airline crashes. And Black Monday, I can't remember what year, I'm sorry, 1987-ish, I want to say, stock market crash was because of automation, automated trading. The badness happens as we increase automation if we're not smart. Basically, we need to do human-centered development where we think about how humans think and understand our users who are going to be using these systems. And we need to build them as build in the idea that the human is going to be part of this system. When the human is just there as a monitor, bad things happen. Einstein said this better than I can. Computers are incredibly fast, accurate, and stupid. Humans are incredibly slow, inaccurate, but brilliant. Together, they are powerful beyond imagination. Also, a great book out there, I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but essentially, when we add technology, we are just increasing the things we have to have situation awareness of. We're increasing the things we have to have understanding of. It does not change anything about how we think about the world. We just have one more thing to pay attention to, and that thing doesn't change what happens. It does not reduce our workload unless we design it in a way thinking about what are the humans' workload? What are they thinking about? How do I reduce their workload and reduce the things they need to think about for them to be going forward? But we can't have the humans as the backup. We have to have them as part of the system. If they are considered the backup for technology, what happens is that they will sit there and basically fall asleep. They'll get bored. The vigilance decrement or complacency will set in. They'll say, I know what's going on, fine. And they won't pay attention. And if they are paying attention and they do happen to get alerted, then they have to recognize there is a problem. They have to figure out what that problem is, and they may not have the skills anymore to do that because they haven't done it in so long. And then they have to take action. And usually they are asked to do this in milliseconds or minutes, and they can't do it. So we need to do human-centered development, where we think of the total system as including the human, and we consider workload, situation awareness, trust, and complacency. I've talked about workload, I've talked about situation awareness, I've talked about complacency. I'm going to talk about trust for a minute. So trust is defined in human factors as the perceived reliability of the system, not the actual reliability, but the perceived reliability. Essentially, this is the mental model the user has of how the system works. If they have a correct mental model of that system, they'll know when they're supposed to use it, when they're not supposed to use it, and understand why something went wrong. So they can step in and be a partner with the system or anticipate, hey, this isn't going to work in this situation. I need to do something different. If they don't have a correct mental model of how the system works, then they could either be in an overtrust situation, which is like, fine, I'll let the machine do it, I won't do anything, which is where we get the Tesla accidents and the other autonomous vehicle accidents, among many other situations. If they are in a distrust situation, it's a box sitting someplace that they never use. I actually saw this when I worked for the US Navy. We'd go out on ships from time to time. I'd ask them what the things were. We never use that thing. Probably spent thousands of millions of tax dollars to build that thing, but it's just sitting there because they didn't trust it to do anything, so they didn't use it. Or they could have mistrust, which is they use it, but not when it will be the most advantageous for them. And they won't use it when it will be the most advantageous for them. We want those mental models to be accurate so that they have appropriate trust and use the system in the right situation. We're all familiar with ChatGPT. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect as implied on the ChatGPT. It's not really the Dunning-Kruger, but it's a nice mental model of how things work. People first use ChatGPT, they go, oh my God, this is amazing. That's overtrust. Then they go, wait a second, it gave me some false information. That's mistrust. I'll ask it these questions instead of these questions. Then they use it, and it tells them that there's 3 R's, or there's 2 R's in the strawberry and not 3 R's in the strawberry. And I go, what the hell is this? And they don't use it anymore. That's distrust. And then if they actually get past this point, which the vast majority of people will not get to, they will then go, oh, I'm supposed to use it in these situations, which is appropriate trust. It is our job as technology developers to get them into that appropriate trust zone immediately. And because the vast majority of people, once they get to distrust, will not use the system ever again. They won't take time to figure out why they're using it wrong. And this is usually done with the UI. The UI is about communicating to the user about the system. It is how they build their mental model, that and the outcomes of it. Black boxes are the bane of existence for anyone who uses technology because they can't build a mental model of how it works. Instead, we need to provide them a look under the hood. We don't have to show them all the algorithms. We don't have to tell everything that's going on, but we need to give them a sense of what's going on. This is a display some coworkers of mine worked on for UAV planning. Were asked to come in because the UAV planners weren't using the UAV. They were just writing their own plans because the UAV plans that this system was coming up with looked ridiculous to the planners. They're like, I'm not going to use that. So they were asked to change the user interface and what the output of the planning was. And this shows them. I'm saying these are the other assets in the area that can spy in these spaces. This is what they're spying on. This is threats that we know in the area that can do harm to the UAV. This is how much fuel you have. And based on this information, I think this really weird route is the right thing to do. And when we did testing of it, we actually found that with this display, performance of the system increased tremendously because the UAV planners would go, oh, I understand what it's doing. I'm going to accept this plan. Or, oh, I understand why it did this, but it didn't know this thing, and tweak that plan, and that would be an even better plan than what they would have come up with on their own, just by giving them a little bit of information as to how the algorithm was working under the hood. Not telling them the mathematics or the code, just saying, here's some information that I'm considering in what I'm doing. But human-centered design is much more than just the user interface. We also have to think about the back-end design and the reliability, because if the back-end can't be explained in a user interface, that doesn't really work. And the reliability of the system, it's the perceived reliability of the system. So we need to explain, hey, this is the maintenance that has to be done. This is the situations it works, it doesn't work. And we have to think about, are these situations people are actually going to encounter when they're using this or not? And think about the fact that, hey, a mom stressed, looking at her phone and the computer with kids going, mommy, 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 might happen. And that we need to understand that and not just assume everybody's going to pay full attention to our display or our system every minute of the day. That we have other contexts that are going on. Essentially, people ignore technology that ignores people. I love this cartoon because they've come up with a very innovative piece of technology, but they have no idea what problem it solves. Sorry, the light's blinding me and I don't have my glasses on, so I can't read. There are 6 components that we have to consider when we're doing this. These all come from the International Standards Organization definition of usability. Basically, we have to think about who are the users, specified users, what are their goals that they want to accomplish, and what context of use do they have. And then we have to think about how can they accomplish those goals effectively, efficiently, and with satisfaction. And how would they define effectively, efficiently, and with satisfaction? To do this, there are 3 phases of human-centered development: formative, directive, and evaluative, and they all have research that has to be done. In formative research, I'm actually going to backtrack a second, but formative research, I'll go through these questions, you probably are reading them, but I want to bring attention to the cartoon. It isn't just the UX researchers or the PM's job to know the answers to these questions. Everybody on the team needs to know what the answers to these questions are. What is those 6 components for each user? Because if you don't, you're going to build something that nobody wants to use. And the questions you need to think about in the formative stage are, where does this fit in our organizational strategy? Who are the users? Is there one type of user or many? Who else can be impacted by this technology? Might not be a user. What are the relevant characteristics of those individuals? I'm going to start reading off of here. It's going to be easier instead of being blinded by the light. What are the user's goals? How are those goals met today? What is good or bad about the current situation? If there's something good in that situation, you don't want to change it. You only want to take away the bad. What are users' priorities for improvements? There might be something bad about that situation, but it is not something they care about. It may look bad to you as not being in the situation, but it may not be something they care about. What contextual factors need to be considered? How do the users define effective, efficient, and satisfaction? Then, once we have all those information, going back to the chart, we can start thinking about what we're actually going to build. How are we going to solve that problem? Once we have ideas for that solution, we're in directive research. And we can say, how will the business track success for this solution? What are the business goals and constraints? How will our solution change what the user does? Is that change a good value for the customer? Does it improve the total system effectiveness? Does it improve their efficiency? Does it improve satisfaction? And what can go wrong? This is critical. I have seen so many technologies where, like, if everything goes right, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be more efficient, more effective, and everybody's going to be happy. But it only works 50% of the time. And when that 50% goes wrong, things go boom. And that is not a good solution. So what are the things that can go wrong, and how do we prevent those errors? How do we mitigate those errors? Once we have a final solution and we actually start to build that solution, then we can start doing evaluative research. And basically at that point, is this design user-friendly? Does it capitalize on the user's patterns? There are actually medical systems that were out during COVID time. The FDA had to put out a warning because 2 different companies had created 2 different cleaning supplies, basically sanitation programs for, I can't remember what the equipment was. One, blue meant that it was unclean and pink meant that it was clean. The other one, pink meant that it was the opposite. And the companies were basically the hospitals were buying both of these systems. And although nothing did go wrong, there were lots of near misses reported where people started almost gave out equipment that hadn't been sanitized because they couldn't get straight which equipment am I using? This is why standards are good. Just come to Ireland and you'll see that in the major intersections it says look left, because Ireland's one of those countries where traffic's going the wrong way. Does it support situation awareness? Do I know what's going on in the world? Do I have more information? Does it support flow? Am I in that place, that zone of optimal cognitive performance? I'm not in complacency, I'm not in tunneling, I'm not in vigilance, I'm not in overload as a user. I am in that state of flow where I'm going to have the best performance I'm going to have. Does it build appropriate trust? Is the user more effective with the system? Are they more efficient with the system? Are they happy with the system? So, in conclusion, if the user can't use it, it doesn't work. Please, please, please don't be a raccoon designing for a hoof-stock creature. You are coders and developers, and you work in technology. You have very different patterns than your customers. Even if your customers are also in technology, they didn't spend months and months and months developing the technology, so they don't have the same patterns you have. Every so often, sit there and look at it from a naive person's point of view. Have a naive person look at it going forward. I'm happy to take questions, but I also would love to follow you on LinkedIn or have you follow me on LinkedIn or Medium.